In this module, we're going to start talking about how we can customize the Jabber for Windows installation. Specifically, in this module, we're going to talk about, first and foremost, why a custom installation. What are my motivations or the driving factors that are leading me to want to even do this at all? We're going to talk about options for customizing your installation, and there are really two popular options that are out there, and they're going to include command line parameter passing and creating a custom MSI. And we're going to go through both command line parameters and creating a custom MSI using the options that I find myself typically using in production environments. So why a custom installation? Well, first and foremost, it's all about the user experience. When I create a deployment of Jabber for Windows, I want to make sure that the end user has the most seamless experience possible. And the way I do that is by creating an environment where there is a zero configuration installation. And what I mean by that is I don't want the end user to have to go into the application after it's been installed and configure parameters or options or settings or anything like that. I want the end user to have the same experience the first time and every time. I don't want it to be different the first time. And by default, when you install Jabber for Windows, if you don't do a custom installation, either with passing command line parameters to the MSI installer or by rolling a custom MSI, what's going to happen is the first time that it comes up, it's going to ask them for their email address. And it's got a unique looking dialog box when it does that. And it's going to try to determine, hey, are you a WebEx cloud user for Jabber messaging? Are you an on-prem presence user? And it's doing that through a discovery process. Well, I don't want that to happen. I want the application to already be tuned to behave the way I want it to behave in the environment that I've configured. So same experience the first and every time. Let's talk about two different options for customizing your installation. And don't let me say that these are the only ways to do it. And specifically, I'm referring to Jabber for Windows. There may be other options available to you on other platforms. So let's just stay focused on the topic here. So first and foremost, you can pass command line options, and that's when you're using the MSI exec.exe file to launch the MSI installation. Now, this is going to be very similar to any other Microsoft installer application that you have used, where you open a command prompt, you type MSI exec, and then you pass command line parameters to it. So that's one way of doing it. And I find that this method is most appropriate for environments where people are using a package management system to automatically or in a scripted way deploy software throughout their enterprise. I don't want an end user having to open a command prompt and type MSI exec.exe with a bunch of parameters. That's silly. I mean, that's defeating the purpose here. But if I'm using something like an automated software deployment suite that can do that for me, perhaps can even do it transparently without even popping up to the user so they don't even know it's happening, then it's a great fit for command line options. The second approach is rolling a custom MSI using MS Orca. And really what we're doing when we roll a custom MSI is we're simply filling in some values, essentially the same values as we're passing if we were using a command line parameter approach, and we're embedding those into the MSI so that when you launch the installer, it's going to assume those options. Let's go into the next slide and let's talk about how to install with those command line options, and then after that we'll talk about customizing an MSI and we'll walk you through that process. If we're installing with command line options, I'm going to be providing the system administrator with a string that they're going to use during the installation routine. And in my environment, it's going to look something like this. MSI exec.exe /I Cisco Jabber setup.msi /quiet clear equals 1 services domain equals cisco.lab voice services domain equals cisco.lab excluded services equals WebEx. Let's talk about what each of these options mean if you're not already familiar with these. First and foremost, /quiet is going to perform a silent installation. And this is one of those flags that I may or may not choose to set depending on client preference. Clear equals 1 is going to override any existing bootstrap files that are found. If you don't do a clear equals 1, then you're going to utilize the settings in those bootstrap files. So for me, clear equals 1 is perfect. Next, I'm going to set the services domain to cisco.lab. And this value is going to set the value of the domain that your DNS SRV records for the Jabber for Windows service discovery process resides in. In this example, cisco.lab is the domain that I'm going to do that DNS SRV record lookup against. Voice services domain equals cisco.lab. This may be a bit redundant to the services domain example, but it does become something important in a hybrid model where you may be reaching out to WebEx in the cloud. So I like to set it just as a matter of best practice. And again, in a hybrid model, this is going to do the same type of thing as what services domain is doing, and that's setting the value of the domain where the DNS records are deployed. And finally, since we're talking about an on-prem presence solution and we're not going to go out to the cloud, I'm going to say excluded services is WebEx. And what's going to happen here, by default, if I were to install Jabber for Windows, remember I said that it's going to prompt you for your email address? Well, the next thing it's going to do is it's going to go out to the WebEx Messenger site and try to determine, are you a WebEx Messenger subscriber based on your email address? It's looking for an account. And since this is an on-prem solution and there is no WebEx Messenger as a part of this, I don't even want it to try to do that. I don't want to go out to the cloud and look an account up. That's silly. So I'm just going to turn WebEx services off. Now, this does not preclude you from doing a WebEx integration for conferencing capability. This is simply a matter of, am I dealing with WebEx Messenger in the cloud, or am I dealing with on-prem IM and presence services as my presence provider? The next option for dealing with a custom deployment is to customize the Cisco-provided MSI using the Microsoft MS Orca tool. And we'll demonstrate that here in a minute, but let me give you a little bit of background on what that process is going to look like. First, you're going to have to download the Microsoft Windows SDK for Windows Server, and you'll get that from Microsoft's website. When you install the Windows SDK for Windows Server, you'll then be able to access the Microsoft Orca application. And if memory serves, you install the Windows SDK and it gives you an Orca installer, and then you install Orca. Next, you're going to download the Cisco Jabber for Windows admin zip file from Cisco's website. This is going to contain the information we need in order to customize the MSI. At the same time, and in fact from the same page, you're going to download the Cisco Jabber for Windows install zip file. This is going to contain the MSI itself. And I want you to keep in mind, and this has bit me in the past because I wasn't paying attention, but the Jabber admin zip version is specific. So if you're on Jabber 10.5 and 10.6 comes out, you can't use the admin zip from 10.5. You want to go back out and re-download the version of the admin zip file that matches the version of Jabber that you're deploying. In the next section here, we're going to go through a customization process of an MSI file using the Microsoft Orca application, and I'll show you how you would go about creating that custom MSI based on those same command line parameters and provisioning options that we discussed previously.